Thank you, members. I would remind you to turn off your mobile phones. We're now going to open a public session. We do have quorum, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. Please advise for those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as that they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Members, are there any new interests to declare, not declared at the first meeting, that are relevant to any matters under discussion this week? No, okay. So agenda item 1 is apologies. Chair, are you aware of any apologies? None have been made directly to me? No, okay, so we're expecting a full attendance. Is there anyone attending via Zoom that you're aware of? No? No, okay. Okay, agenda item 2, Chairperson's business. Members are referred to pages 5 to 7 of the pack to correspondence from the Chairperson of the Committee for the Economy regarding last week's joint concurrent meeting. Members of the Economy Committee thanks us for our participation in considering responsive fibrous networks limited to Stormy Owen and invites the committee to a further joint concurrent evidence sessions with DAERA and DFE officials. Provisional time and date will be the 12 noon in the Senate chamber on Wednesday the 28th of May. The matters to be covered in that session include the provision of telecommunication access in rural and urban areas, development of related storm protection measures, the need for formalised backup arrangements with broadband subcontractors, and the absence of an open reach service level agreement. So, members, are you content that we have the joint concurrent committee evidence session in May, and are you content with those points that have just been read in? Okay, members, thank you very much. Once we confirm our attendance, the Economy Committee will write to both departments provisionally inviting officials to the joint concurrent meeting at 12 noon in the Senate chamber on the 28th of May. Okay. Item number 2, I have requested the clerk to seek an update on the progress of the review of FVAS scheme, and I refer you to page 8 in your pack. The department has stated that a draft of the review is not yet complete due to limited resources and other commitments. It is estimated that the review is at least a couple of months from completion. And members, any comments that they want to make, or can we discuss further with officials later as we start deliberations on the agriculture bill? Content? Thank you. Item number 3, members, I refer you to pages 9 to 11 of the pack. The new House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee has now assumed responsibility for the scrutiny of matters relating to the Windsor Framework. During the previous government, we were frequently copied into relevant correspondence. This is the first piece of such copied correspondence from the new House of Lords Committee dated the 10th of March from Lord Carlisle, I think, Chair of the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee, to Nick Thomas Simmons, MP Minister for the Cabinet Office, regarding an update on veterinary medicines and the Windsor Framework. The letter states that the Chair welcomes the reconstitution of the Veterinary Medicines Working Group in September and has requested an update on the issues related in the letter, including the number of products at risk of discontinuation with no identified route for alternative supply. Members, in future we will consider such copied correspondence under correspondence, but as it was the first one for a while, I wanted to highlight it to you. Do you have any comments to make at this point? Are you content to note? Okay, thank you, members. Item number 4, refer you to pages 3 to 8 of the table papers to correspondence from Deafblind UK, a sight and hearing loss charity, regarding their partnership with Libraries NI to launch sight and hearing information points in libraries across Mid Ulster Council area. The aim is to ensure local residents have easier access to crucial support for sight and hearing loss by introducing dedicated information points in libraries. Just wanted to draw it to your attention, particularly with their work in rural areas. So, are you content to note? Yeah. Thank you, members. Item number 5, after last week's meeting, I was thinking that it would be useful to get a table of all the actions in the Loughnane plan with an update on progress on each one. Basically a summary, ready reference table. Are you content that we ask officials to provide that? Yeah, thank you, members. Item number 6, I refer you to pages 9 to 22 of the table papers for the Minister's oral statement he made to the Assembly on Tuesday regarding the triple threat of foot and mouth disease in Hungary, avian influenza and blue tongue virus. Have you any comments? Are you content to note? Yeah, and it was the Minister did reach into both myself and the Deputy Chair, I think on Friday evening, to give us, so that was useful. Item number 7, members, as you know, the committee team issued a pack for our meeting on a Monday. As Monday the 17th of March is a public holiday, the pack will be issued as early as possible on the Tuesday instead. Are you content? Okay, thank you, members. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 27th of February. Refer you to pages 13 to 26 of the pack for the draft minutes dated the 6th of March. If you have any comments to make, please do so, or if not, are you content that they are accurate as drafted, and if so, I'll sign the minutes. Thank you, members. Thank you. Matters arising, I refer you to response from the Department dated 6th of March, page 28-29 of the pack, regarding the general handle of SL1 SRs Further to previous correspondence on this matter, for the majority of SRs, the Department will seek to ensure a 2-week timeframe between the submission of the SL1 and the laying of the SR. In relation to more complex SRs, the Department will strive to allow for longer than 2 weeks on a case-by-case basis and in consultation with the clerk. The Department states that there may be unforeseen circumstances where it may not be able to accommodate this timeframe. Have members any comments they want to make, or are you content to note the response? Yep. I think that's a good action, to be fair. Item number 2, I refer you to response from Aquaculture NI at pages 34 to 35 of the pack to the letter from the Minister we considered our meeting on the 20th of February and agreed to forward to Aquaculture NI. The response covers a number of issues of concern to the sector since the spread of zebra mussels was implicated in the Lough Neagh crisis in 2023. They state that despite numerous discussions with DAERA, guidance and a reasonable approach to managing the risk is still lacking. DAERA continue to reject applications by operators of shellfish movement, significantly affecting their activities compared to other water users. The response also states that despite DAERA directing operators to take all reasonable steps to avoid introduction of new species, it is not specified what reasonable steps are. Members, have you any comments to make on that? Or are you content to note at this stage? We will continue to monitor that and make ourselves available. Thank you. Agenda item 5 now is SL1. The Quality of Bathing Water Amendment Regulations for Northern Ireland 2025. So members, I refer you to pages 37 to 72 of the pack for this item. That is the SL1, the Quality of Bathing Water Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025, including Annex 1, Candidate Waters for Identification with MAP, Annex 2, Report of the 2022-2023 Bathing Water Review. The Department intends to make the SR to amend Schedule 1 of the Quality of Bathing Water Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2008, as amended 2018, to increase the number of bathing waters identified from 26 to 33. Members, the SR will be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure and subject to executive approval. It is anticipated that it will come into operation on the 1st of April 2025, which is only a number of weeks away. So I'm going to welcome the following officials to brief us on the SL1. We have Claire Vincent, the Deputy Director of Marine and Fisheries Division. We have Claire Young, the Principal Scientific Officer at DAERA, and Brendan O'Kane, Deputy Principal at DAERA. Thank you so much for attending committee, and I now open the floor to you for your briefing.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to given your last comments there around the time frame for the SR, it only has to be in place before the start of the bathing season, so there is more time than the 1st of June it has to be in place for. So there is a number of weeks for deliberation. We recognise the importance of that. So I'm going to ask Claire Young to do the opening remarks, and then I'm going to ask Brenton to talk a little bit about the review. Though Brenton is new to this work area and was not the lead officer in this, so but having said that, he's been reading in to that, so it might be me that has to pick up on some of your questioning. So I'll hand over to Claire first.
Thank you. Good morning. Northern Ireland's bathing waters are protected by the Quality of Bathing Water Regulations 2008. These were last amended in 2018 when 3 sites were added. Monitoring of bathing water quality is important not only for bathers' public health, but also as an indication of our overall health of our waters. Northern Ireland currently has 26 identified bathing waters. An identified bathing water is one which is listed in Schedule 1 of the regulations, requiring the Department to comply with the provisions of the regulations in relation to those waters. The Department decided not to review the existing 26 bathing waters as these are well established, frequently used and have recognised bathing water operators in place. The Department is aware of the marked increase in interest in open water swimming over the past few years. A bathing water review was undertaken in 2022-23, and the review sought nominations for new sites where large numbers of people are bathing and examined the length of the bathing season given the growing trend for year-round bathing. The regulations currently define the bathing water season in Northern Ireland as the 1st of June to the 15th of September. The Bathing Water Review, published in June 2023, concluded that 7 new bathing waters should be formally identified in legislation. There's significant interest in the topic of bathing waters, and there's been media coverage on the number of sites and also around wider issues like the length of the bathing season. The Department therefore intends to amend Schedule 1 of the Quality of Bathing Water Regulations Northern Ireland 2008 to increase the number of bathing waters identified under the regulations from 26 to 33. The 7 new sites along with the bathing water operators, are Brompton Bay and Bangor and Donaghadee under the bathing water operator of Ards and North Down Borough Council, Cushendall with Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council, Drains Bay and Portmuck with Mid and East Antrim Borough Council as the bathing water operator, Reswood at Antrim with Antrim and Newton Abbey Borough Council, and Warren Point with Newry, Mourne and Down District Council. These sites have now been nominated as candidate sites for 2 full bathing seasons in 2020. Have now been monitored, as candidate sites for 2 full bathing seasons in 2023 and 24. A statutory rule is required to amend Schedule 1 and increase the number of bathing waters identified under the regulations. The Department proposes to make the statutory rule under powers conferred on it by Section 14 of the retained EU Revocation and Reform Act 2023. The amending regulations will be subject to negative resolution. Previous amendments were made under Section 2.2 of the European Communities Act 1972, which transposed the 2006 revised EU Bathing Water Directive. These regulations provide the statutory system for monitoring, classification and the provision of information to the public on potential risks to human health. These regulations also have a specific focus on the protection of public health and are complementary to the Water Environment Regulations Northern Ireland 2017, which provide an overarching framework for monitoring and management of the marine environment. Positive responses to the 7 new identified sites have been received from both the Infrastructure Minister and Minister of Health. The Minister for Infrastructure stated her support for these new bathing waters and is committed to helping to deliver improvements in water quality across Northern Ireland. However, she also raises the point that the formal identification of some of the candidate sites may still require significant capital investment to achieve the desired good standard, and that this will likely cover multiple price control periods. She commits to continuing to work closely with the Department and NI Water to secure adequate and sustainable funding. The Minister of Health provided his support for the 7 new bathing waters and emphasised that regulations provide important public health protections to bathers through the classification system and provision of information. The Minister also supports the review to extend the bathing water season so that it reflects public usage as a means of protecting public health. A commitment has been made in the Environmental Improvement Plan to conduct a full bathing water review by the end of 2026. My colleague Brendan O'Kane will provide some background information on the consultation exercise behind the 7 new sites.
Good morning. A public consultation was undertaken in spring of 2022 as part of the 22-23 Bathing Water Review and received 172 responses with 352 nominations for 101 candidate bathing water sites, including inland water sites. For comparative purposes, it is interesting to note that only 4 candidate sites were requested in the 2017 review. The 22-23 Bathing Water Review considered new candidate bathing sites and the statutory length of the bathing season. This reflects the increasing interest in open water swimming and associated concerns about water quality and risks to public health. The Department's criteria for the identification of bathing waters were established in the consultation back in the 2006 review and have since been used in the 2006, 2011 and 2017 reviews. The criteria are closely linked to the directive requirements and are as follows. A. Must be used by a large number of bathers. The guide value used in Northern Ireland is 45 bathers on at least 1 occasion or 100 site users on at least 2 occasions. B. Bathing must not be prohibited or inadvisable for reasons of safety at the site. And C. There must be an appropriate body willing to take on the formal responsibility of bathing water operator for the site, typically the local council or a landowner or indeed manager. The 20 most nominated sites from the spring 2022 consultation were surveyed over the 22 bathing season and criteria were initially met at 10 sites. However, councils withdrew their support as a potential bathing water operator at 3 of those sites, which were Castlewellan, Gortin Lakes and Muckross, resulting in the 7 sites before you today. As Claire mentioned, these sites have now been monitored as candidate sites for 2 full bathing seasons in 2023 and 2024. Preliminary classifications for these sites based on 2 years of data rather than the recommended 4 years are provided in Annex 1 of your papers along with a map. The review report of the bathing water consultation is at Annex 2 and was web published in June 2023. The draft regulations, the Quality of Bathing Water Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025, is provided at Annex 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. This is something, I'm only chairing the committee since October, but it's something we've touched on a number of times. There is a bit of interest in the committee. And that's probably certainly captured in some of what you've said, and it's captured in your papers that the response to the consultation was quite significant given previous consultation responses, and obviously the greater interest in open water swimming and cold water dippers in particular. So in that regard, I note that part of the assessment is the numbers of people who dip. So 45 people, I think it is, in a single dip maybe. But is that just, what's the time frame for that? Is that in one instance, in one day, in 1 week, or at any point in a year that constitutes that? Or was there any thought given to smaller numbers but more regular use as opposed to the big number in a shorter time period? Does that make sense?
Yes. So
sometimes the questions are a bit convoluted, but
so those criteria were established during the 2006 consultation, and they were based on Scottish figures because clearly this large number of bathers is different in the south coast of England than it might be in Northern Ireland, particularly back in 2006. And so we worked with Scotland at that time and put that out to consultation. So it was 40, to answer your question directly, it was 45 users on a single occasion. And we did that, we asked for evidence from people nominating, but also then did survey work. The department wanted to quality assure that and do some survey work to see what that looked like. But we recently have had, I think we recognise even from this last consultation, there's a need to relook at that. And we have agreed now, it's in the Environmental Improvement Programme, that another review of bathing waters will be done by the end of 2026. I think that was actually put into the EIP to specifically look at the length of the bathing season, but we've since had an OEP report on how we're implementing bathing waters, and they've raised this issue too and said you might want to look at that. So we think within Marine and Fisheries Division, we've been doing a lot of kind of co-design work in our consultations, and I think that's the approach we're going to take. We've already, for this next review, and we'll look at that about, try and take on board people's comments, like your own, about, well, what about little and often, and how would we cover that? Would that give a fairer idea of places where people are swimming?
Yeah, I think it's really important. From my perspective, and a lot of this will be the big spike, if you like, in terms of increase, I think, is in around mental health. Yes. And people are evidently have seen the benefit of cold water, swimming, dipping, whatever it is. I suppose the danger is that if the water that people are dipping in it might be cold enough to give you that experience, but it may not be of sufficiently clean quality. My fear is then obviously that the regular exposure to something that maybe isn't in the condition that you think it is could lead to implications in health in the long term. And I'm just wondering, not to make it a regulation point, but in terms of wider guidance for the public outside of the licensing or the regulation of these, is there any thought to doing something in that space that it would be guidance for other areas outside of this?
In connection with the blue-green algae piece, Lough Neagh and further afield, we worked last year, we recognised during 2023 that the communication needs to be improved, and that's an ongoing work area. And we worked away in a multi-agency group on that specific issue, on the blue-green algae issue, and with the key message about if in doubt, stay out. So if there's algal scum, stay out. In terms of bacteria and coliforms, we get questions. The Minister gets Assembly questions. There was one recently on swimming in the Collins water. And we're very clear about no urban water courses, no. So it was something we'd need to pick up with the councils, because they are the ones that actually lead with the signage piece, and that's a whole art in itself. Or so they tell us about. The more signs you put up, the less people actually read them. So, but I think in terms of our 26 sites and now to be 33, subject to your views, of course. But we're getting better coverage, and there's certainly more awareness. And I would say we get more questions about suitable water courses, and try and give general advice on that.
You mentioned there, and it's something I wanted to just move into then, with regard to Lough Neagh. One of the candidates has, in terms of the scores in the doors, came back as poor.
Yeah.
Is that linked to, because geographically, certainly on the map, it certainly looks like it would be indicative of Lough Neagh. It's proximity, which is Raiswood. Raiswood, is it? How you pronounce
Yes, Raiswood, Antrim.
Yeah.
So it's failing on the coliform counts,
Okay.
but also on the council. We had to advise the council to put up advice against bathing for most of the bathing season last year, from the 16th of July, and that wasn't removed till October because of the thick green algae scum. So it was failing on two bases. But the one thing about the coliform counts is that within the bathing waters you need 4 years of monitoring to get a really robust. So it may look better, but there's clearly coliform issues there, and that's why then the posters have to go up. And we've also been working on text alerts and pushes through social media. We're working on that area as well. To try and get that message out. I think it's the Antrim Chili Dippers. I think they're kind of well aware of the water quality situation there.
I think we'll send our point man in Antrim, John Blair, up there in his Speedos to join them sometime, maybe just to test it out. Final question from me, if that's all right. One of the consultation, I think it's the first question maybe in the consultation, and it's really interesting, and I just haven't teased out exactly where you're going to go with this. So the testing only runs, I think, from maybe June to September, but the 81% of respondents wants basically an all year round, and I get that, and my friends certainly do dip all year round. Where's the department going in that space? Are they moving into an all year round testing regime?
Yeah, so we do recognise that the sites are used year round, and there's a requirement there. So what has happened is we've had out of season sampling, and it's published on our website. Now that is monthly at the moment, and it's going to help guide, I hope, the discussions that come through our review process as to what sites maybe are suitable for year round bathing. So that, like I said, that's all published already on the website for anybody who wants to get a more complete picture of what's happening at their favourite bathing water spot.
The previous minister requested that we gather more information to look at the implications of that. So that was Minister Poots before he left office. Gave out that instruction. So that was, and again, so we've got 2 full years now of out of season monitoring, albeit at a not as frequent level. And there's challenges for the out of season monitoring as well, because some of the sea conditions, even from going in to collect samples, are serious compared to those summer months. So there's lots to be considered there. But we do recognise that people are dipping year round. So how do we give better advice around that? So by the time we're doing the next review, we will have 3 years worth of data, which will certainly form part of that process.
It just occurred to me, I'm going to bring in now Declan, very, very short question. To alleviate that problem, is there not technology that could be put? Could we not have something that literally sits in the water and sends something out by constant testing and sends it by GPS, Bluetooth, or whatever, sort of, that gives us an in the moment reading, rather than sending people out in their waders?
Yes, so the monitoring that we do is in the regulations, and that is UCAS quality assured process, microbiological testing. But we also have a Swim NI, which is a predictive service at 6 sites, and that was an EU funded project with AFBI and DCU, Dublin City University. So that provides a predictive service over the course of the bathing season and takes into account rainfall and other factors to help again, provide that information to let people make the best possible choice of where to bathe. There's also other new technologies coming online. We are looking at those, but we follow the regulations and that sort of gold level sampling standard that allows us to compare over the season and over years.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yep.
I'll defer on.
Okay. JB, and then thank you.
Thank you. And on the subject of visiting the site, I'm a never say never kind of person. Claire Brendan, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we can comment at the outset that, you know, this is a good news story, not only in terms of the number of waters applying and the consultation responses, but also it clearly signifies the increased number of people participating in outdoor and nature-based activities. The questions I was going to ask, some of them have been covered in relation to raised wood, by what the chair asked there, but just to extend that a bit further, if I may. The position became clear last year that the Lough Neagh situation was also having an impact on some of our coastal waters, particularly in the north, on the north coast. Is that being considered when some of the other waters are being looked at? The first question. I'll just do the second one as well. You mentioned that some of the progress going forward will be dependent on available resources. So is there any sign that those resources will be available? And additionally, are the resources you're working with now better than they were in times of previous analysis? Or are they still the same and therefore in need of increased resources?
So in terms of, yes, the blue-green algae impacted the north coast, and we've seen that in 2023 and 2024. But after 2023, we committed to where the messaging was really tricky because we'd never dealt with anything like this before. So we got together and formed, I've chaired an interagency group then to develop a blue-green algae monitoring protocol, which was a tiered system then to help us with what public messaging do we need to give. We operated that with all the agencies involved and talking to our bathing water operators. The primary ones involved in it this year were Antrim and Newton Abbey, Causeway Coast and Glens, and the National Trust is also a bathing water operator as well. And we used that format then to as to when we would send out alerts and when we would alert the public as to, right, these scums are now combined with the monitoring that we're doing. The monitoring happened in Lough Neagh. So under the protocol, say tiered system, kind of, I think the lowest level is a visual inspection every couple of weeks. But then once you find a blue-green algae or any evidence of it, then the monitoring increases. So the monitoring at Raise Wood was going on fortnightly from March last year. But also then the lower ban and also the bathing waters, which are being visually assessed then through the bathing season, and there's somebody visiting those at least once a week during the bathing season. So we had a much, we didn't, you'll remember back in 2023, there was advice against bathing at our North Coast sites. You know, that was a very precautionary kind of view, but there were scums being spotted on the beach. From our monitoring, then we didn't actually have to do that in 2024 because we knew from the biovolume work that we were doing and cyanotoxin testing that was also happening that the levels were low and were not posing a risk. But that protocol is applicable to the whole of Northern Ireland. I mentioned the area where it came in earnest, but had it happened at other coastal water sites, again, they're being visually monitored as well as bacterial samples being collected for bacterial analysis every single week. Moving on to then, in terms of resourcing, so I'm really pleased to say, so last year we really struggled with resourcing within the teams just through a retirement. I mentioned that already, but Brenton's now in place in terms of our policy lead, but we had retirements, we had folk leaving the team and just the resourcing issues. Because Lough Neagh is a priority for resourcing, we have been successful in bidding for new team members. So we're in a much better place for the 2025 season than for the 2024 season. And we'll need it all because it's really high profile, a lot of communication on it as well. And so we're definitely in a better place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can I ask then for clarification, are you leading on the Lough Neagh Action Plan as well in your team, or is there a separate sub-team for that?
So we are leading on that Action 37, which is the interagency protocol,
Okay.
because bathing waters that's the tier 1 response is needed on the bathing water side. So that's a piece that we are leading on as part of the wider team. So we're not part of that separate team within NIEA, but we work really closely with NIEA.
Yeah, but I didn't frame that brilliantly there.
Okay.
But that is a sign then there is joint up working going
Oh,
on
absolutely,
there as well. Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And really close work, and that's what the protocol is actually all about. It's about alerting each other, and of course the gold standard will be the Lough Neagh data platform, which is another action within the action plan. We're not there yet, but eventually that will make this data sharing really easy. But on that interagency group, we have Public Health Agency, we're getting advice from them, Food Standards Agency, NIEA, ourselves, who else? AFBI, of course. So there's good working and sharing of results. So because Northern Ireland Water is obviously there monitoring raw water. So we're all monitoring for different reasons. We're doing the bathing water piece. NIEA are doing the general kind of Lough Neagh monitoring. AFBI also the same. NI Water doing raw water monitoring. So again, we're kind of sharing data and yeah.
That's good news to know then. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. And Aoife?
Oh yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for all the information so far. It's been really interesting, and it is welcome news that the additional bathing sites have been added. I just see here, and you have mentioned as well that Part B here in the consultation part, there must be an appropriate body willing to take on formal responsibility of the bathing water, and you've said typically local council. So I'm just wondering, have you engaged with any council areas yet? And I suppose what capacity or resources would it take to take on that responsibility?
So the bathing water operator role is defined in the regulations, and they assume responsibility for the site, but also a communication role as the link to the public. Our sort of key communication, our key linkage there is through our Better Beaches Forum. So we would bring all our bathing water operators together in person once a year and online at another occasion just before the bathing water season to do updates and to get feedback from them. So that bathing water operator role is usually the councils. We have NIEA, assume it, in Crawfordsburn, and then the National Trust up on the North Coast. We are happy, we happy to work with councils. We put guidance out on what the requirements of that role would be, and yeah, it's a very close working relationship over the season in terms of communications, and we rely on them with their interactions with the public to get the messaging across around the bathing waters.
Okay, and that would include like cost management, all of those things, I suppose.
Cost management of the sites.
Well, yeah, if the council were going to take it on, like obviously there would be cost involved in that, yeah.
So there's the signage implications and the updating those signs on a weekly basis. That all does cost money. We have approached all the councils. So again, we've managed in this latest review Rayswood, our first inland site, but we haven't only contacted coastal sites over the last number of reviews. We've contacted all the councils. Some of them have nearly got over the line, and then actually Brenton had mentioned about Fermanagh and Tyrone kind of decided to step back over Gorchin, just to take one example. I think because of uncertainty legally about site ownership, there's things like that. Muckross is the same. So, but again, as we start this new review, we will actively engage again. We did last time as well, but we'll actively engage with those councils to explain all that a wee bit more to them. A wee bit of reticence, you know, there's kind of, yeah, we're keen, and then maybe we're not sure. It's a new area for us, but I think with everything that's happened in the last couple of years in Lough Neagh and with the public outcry, I think we'll get a different response this time. Even in 2022, I think maybe councils as potential bathing water operators are going, well, maybe we're not being lobbied on it. But now I think they will. I think we'll get better engagement with those ones that there's a few that just said no, we don't want to be bathing water operator.
Yeah.
So there's a few areas where that was the case.
Yeah, can I just ask one more question, if you don't mind, Chair? Just in terms of, I just know locally in South Armagh, these amenity areas are very well used and are very important to the people who are there. Just at the top of my head, there's obviously Camla Lake, Loch Ross, even smaller areas like Kiltyban. If there was groups that were using that, how do we get those added onto the list? Is there a way?
There'll be a full review of the bathing waters that'll be conducted next year. So that'll be full engagement, and we'll be going out to consultation. So that'll be advertised via the various means, going out via press and so forth.
Yeah. We've also done, say there's just more interest in general. The three of us actually did a webinar last week with Swim Ulster. They asked us to talk about water quality, and so the three of us were actually up on a webinar there. So again, I think the knowledge the awareness is definitely increasing. And last time round we used citizen science, and we did get nominations for Camla and also for Loch Ross. So we did get some nominations, but they didn't meet the kind of threshold. So, yeah, but who knows? They might do next time round. And as
Hopefully.
swimming groups, you know, as swimming groups get more active, we have had discussions with Newry Moore and Down on Camla because we're aware of how many events and things are run there. So, yeah. Watch this space, I think.
Good. Thank you.
I think of a former colleague in the fire service who swims in Camla all the time. I think he'll be
Yes.
him here beyond you and me.
Really, really well used. Yeah,
very well used.
Yeah.
And Declan, you wanted to come in just at the end there?
Yeah, Chair, thanks for letting me in. And I suppose I should declare an interest as a Director of Lough Macrory Community Development Association, and we have a management agreement with Lough Macrory, the 52-acre lake there, which the village takes its name from. And we do receive a lot of requests for swimming, but I have to say, as community association, is something that we're very nervous about, you know, about management and all that there. So see if a situation emerged where a lake is designated as a bathing area, like, does the managing authority, how does that work in terms of, you know, health and safety, and like, would you have to have like, you know like lifeguards, or no, what does it mean if somewhere is designated as a bathing site?
You'll definitely have to do, I think it's in your pack there, but you'll definitely have to do the signage piece. And so what happens when a site is identified is that we would do the monitoring, the department would do the monitoring and pass those results out on a weekly basis to the bathing water operator, typically councils. But they have a statutory responsibility then to do the signage and to update on the signage, but also then if there's a pollution incident or a blue-green algae, to get the signage amended on a weekly basis. So it's quite a big undertaking for a council, say Ardson North Down or Causeway Coast and Glens. You know, they've got to commit to updating posters on that weekly basis, and then respond in cases of a pollution incident, to put out advice against bathing posters. We're looking all the time to how we do that through IT, but even with that and smartphones, that maybe doesn't reach everybody that it needs to. So it's likely that there'll still be posters and notice boards for some years to come. So those, and also kind of safe access egress as well. You know, that we would do a risk assessment. In this last review, our staff conducted a risk assessment. There were sites that are popularly used, but we couldn't commit to identifying those because, you had to walk on top of a wall to actually get down onto the beach, this sort of thing. So there are those sorts of issues. So there would be a bit of a commitment from a bathing water operator to ensure safety, safe access, egress, and good signage, and a willingness to update that to be part of that, our little family, in terms of getting those public health messages out.
Thank you. And I remember, Thomas?
Chair, with regards to Muckross and Gorchin, you say council has stepped back from operating those, and I do know that those two sites are fairly frequently used, and Gorchin is used the whole year round, because any time you're down you always see somebody within the water. Have you identified then who is actually operating those sites?
So they haven't been formally identified as such. So, but my understanding was, because Muckross has come up a few times, it came up in the 2011 review as well, but my understanding was that there was an issue then over the land ownership and whether, that there was maybe a legal issue between the council and the landowner. I can't be definitive on that, but it was something like that. And I think in Gorchin, I think there might be signs up at one side saying swimming prohibited. And again, that's one of the key issues. So when we talked to the council about that, they couldn't resolve that in time to go ahead with the 2023 monitoring that we were doing. But again, we can certainly engage with them again to alert them to a new review and say, look, if you had issues that you were trying to work through there on land ownership or whatever, there's time now, get the ducks in a row, because we're doing another review and we know that people are bathing there.
Just a wee one.
Just a wee one.
This is because it's Brendan's first time, you see. I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to be naughty. Brendan's got off easy so far myself, if you want to make him sweat a bit.
Just in relation to Raise Wood, did you have any reservations putting that forward for given the classification is per?
The way the regulations are written is that if people are bathing, then the way they're written at the minute, if people are bathing, then you identify. And that if you find if it's poor for 5 years in a row, then you de-identify. And that's because the emphasis is supposed to be on public health advice and getting that message out. And then if you have to de-identify, then you put a sign up to say this area is not suitable for bathing. So that has never happened in Northern Ireland at this point, because the likes of Ballyhome, where we've had a failure maybe 2 years and then it passes 2 years, but it has passed. So there's this then discussion, about how do we improve bathing water quality there. So so there's some reservations, but that's the way the regulations are written. And again, the OEP has an opinion on that as well, about is this the best way to do it. But at the minute, we're still working from the EU retained law, which the approach is very much, if people are bathing, you need to monitor and then tell them that it's not suitable. So we're probably again on that journey to see whether it'll. When we only had the 1 year of data back in 2023, I think maybe 4 of the sites came out poor, but that was on the basis of 20 samples only. Whereas when you add in 40 samples, then you'll see most of them came up over the line, apart from Raise Wood. So again, we'll have to keep monitoring to see to see whether it's going to come up in terms of the cleanliness, but then also the blue-green algae piece. So.
Thank you very much for that. And in your opening comments, Claire, you mentioned the comments that came from DFI and in particular from the Minister with regards to the need for investment in certain sites. Was that just a general comment, or did she have specific concerns?
That was a general comment that came back as a response to that consultation.
So it's that. I mean, DFI may have concerns that sites, if they don't meet the sufficient or good status, that will then potentially have implications for them if it's in an urban setting. But again, there's that piece around that if it is really unsuitable, then the process under the regs is to de-identify rather than to continue on. But with the de-identification, you put up a sign to say, water, it's not suitable for bathing here. So to say we haven't been down that road before, so we'll see how this works out, and whether again the OEP, whether there's a chance now that we're out of Europe to take a slightly different approach. One thing the OEP, they actually, because of our situation here, that they didn't go straight to identification 2 years ago. But they quite like that approach, this idea that there's a candidate site, and I think they run something like that formally in Germany. You know, within that's they monitor for a few years before they take a decision to identify. So they've kind of moved. But all that'll be up for grabs in this next this next consultation. We'll have that public discussion about what's the best way to do this. And
Well, that's very helpful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you.
I've got a very, very short one. So there's a wee one. This is a really interesting conversation as questions come. In terms of particularly the testing regime in and around the coastal waters, more. So for something to fail, how many times does it have to be tested for it to fail? Is it one test? And if that test doesn't seem right.
so it's done on an 80. We do it on 80 samples at the moment over a 4-year period. And it's really hard. You can't tell till the end of. So we have two different things. So if we have a high sample result, 1,250 fecal coliforms. So if we have a high sample result, we'll put out advice against bathing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's a high sample. That's one where we're going something going on there, and we immediately work with NIEA then to look at what's the reason for that, and Northern Ireland Water as well, asking them is there anything strange happening at your assets. But you can't tell from that one high sample result or 2 or 3 in a season whether it's actually going to fail overall on the classification, because it's based on 4 years. So it's based on 4 years worth of data.
It's not dynamic, which is fine. It's obviously in the regulation, but it's not dynamic.
So the idea is that what we talk to swimmers about is, all the information is there on the website. You can look at, we have sites that are really stable, that are always excellent water quality. They're really good all the time. They're robust. Even when it's raining, you won't have a problem. And then you have other sites that are vulnerable. And so the posters will help folks to see that, oh right, yes, after that wet weather event, there was a high result, and that was investigated. And really, that's our advice to bathers is, that get to know your sites. We're very fortunate in Northern Ireland in that if a site is of poor quality or more vulnerable, that we usually have a good site within a very short distance. So that we have bathing water profiles. They show you where all the vulnerable spots are. So all that information's there on the website. And I do think that most of the bathers know their sites. They know when they're vulnerable. They know what they're looking at as well. So we try and help them in how to look at that.
One of the benefits of having such a rainy climate might be that it helps rinse the stuff out so quite quicker. Thank you, Claire, and Brendan. Really appreciated that. And as you can tell, there was a lot of interest, I think, in the committee, and we will definitely be paying attention to this SR when it's made.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Thank you
so much.
Dave. Thank you.
All of you.
Okay,
Thanks.
members, are you agreed that the department proceeds to make the SR, and then we will consider it and the ESR report in due course? Members content. Thank you so much, members.
Very much.
Okay, members, we are moving on to agenda item 6, which is the committee deliberations on the agriculture bill. So this is a significantly large piece of work, and we're going to be commencing our deliberations on the bill now. I'm going to welcome the officials John Tarrington and Elaine McCrory to answer questions and discuss issues as we go along. I'll also welcome our bill official, Aveen Baker. Please bear with me, as I have a bit of information to go through here before we start discussions. And I agreed that the clerk would share this portion of the chair's brief with you all in advance of today's meeting, as this has worked well for bills that Janice has managed in the past. The deliberations are not a formal clause-by-clause stage, but the opportunity to go through the clauses and comprehensively review with the department any issues raised by stakeholders or indeed committee members here today. Members, just to remind you all, the aim of the deliberations is to go through the bill one clause at a time, to discuss any issues or queries in respect of the clauses from the evidence we've received, identify whether there are any further information clarity required from the officials, decide on whether any amendments are to be considered or whether a committee recommendation or ministerial assurance would suffice, and if we do propose any amendment, to be as precise as possible on what we want the amendment to achieve, and to clarify with the department if this is something that the Minister would be happy to undertake. Members, you have been provided with the papers for this item starting at page 75 of the pack, including a copy of the bill and a copy of the explanatory memorandum. The Delegated Powers Memorandum starts at page 107, and we will have a response from the Examiner of Statute Rules on this by next week's meeting. The raised bill research paper starts at page 111, and the Hansard of the raised briefing on the 16th of January starts at page 159. The evidence summary table prepared by the committee team starts at page 170, followed by all the written evidence received either by Citizen Space or accompanying the oral briefings. I would like to point out at this stage that we did not get a large response to the Citizen Space, and most of the responses were from the mushroom sector, and then they also gave us oral evidence. Members, just a reminder that not all respondents wish to have their details or responses made available. So these are provided in confidence to the committee, and the team will redact where necessary before they are published on our website or indeed in the final report. Members, before we get started into the clauses, I will also remind you that last week we considered the letter from the Minister confirming that he will not be closing the FEAS at the end of 2025, allowing producer organisations with a head office in Northern Ireland to submit a new operational programme for approval in September 2025. The Minister has also instructed his officials to begin preparatory work on a replacement scheme to be developed in co-design with the horticulture sector, which will be informed by the ongoing policy review of the current FEAS. However, we heard earlier in the meeting that the review is still at least 2 months from completion. We agreed last week to write to the mushroom sector to seek their opinion of those new developments. I'm just going to highlight those responses now. Members, the response from the mushroom PO, CMG UK Limited and Northwind Mushrooms is at page 24 of the table of papers, in which they welcome the extension but state that following a meeting with the department there are still some significant operational issues as to how growers will be able to benefit due to the complexities of the current rules and the regulations of the FVS timeframes involved. Members, the response from NIMGA regarding the Minister's decision to extend the FEAS is at page 30 of your table of papers. NIMGA welcomes the confirmation that FEAS will not be closed at the end of 2025 and states that the FEAS is the only support scheme which the mushroom sector can access, and the current guarantee of match funding at 4.1% provides certainty for growers. NIMGA also welcomes confirmation that work has started on a replacement scheme which will be developed in co-design with the sector, and lists a series of issues that the development of any future scheme should explore. Members, I also refer you to some correspondence on the bill. As it's standard practice, we wrote to all statutory committees, and we have had a memo from the clerk to the Committee for Finance at page 212 of the pack that they agreed to submit a nil return. I refer you to pages 26 of the table papers to correspondence from the department dated the 11th of March. We raised some queries including details of the support available to the mushroom sector as well as details of the 3 CAFRE schemes currently under development. The responses outline the 3 schemes. 1, the Sustainable Sector Growth Groups, SSGG, Innovation Driver and Support, and then the new Growers Academy, and highlight that although they are of limited benefit to the mushroom sector, they will be available to it regardless if the bill becomes law or not. The Department recognises that the Innovation Support Scheme may not offer the large scale of capital investment that the mushroom industry is seeking, but the FEAS did not offer this either. The Department points to the development of a new capital investment scheme under the Sustainable Agriculture Programme, SAP, focusing on support for primary food producers to invest in equipment and technology to improve their environmental performance and business efficiency. However, it recognises that this will not address issues of automation raised by the mushroom sector. The Department reiterates that the Minister has no plans to pull the rug on the scheme and will not be closing the FES at the end of 2025 and plans to develop an alternative scheme in co-design with the sector. Members, in response to the request made by the sector, the Department states that pausing the bill would potentially mean that DAERA having to provide executive funding that would benefit non-NI-based growers, and the Minister and previous briefings did outline that. There would also be no scope to amend the FEAS or to improve it using the powers in Clause 2. As stakeholders have requested, the bill would fall and it would be for a future Minister and Executive to consider. To remove discretion from the bill would be outside the policy aim of the bill to bring FEAS in line with other grant aid, which is also discretionary. And to ring-fence support for the mushroom sector would not be appropriate, as it would support one sector over another. Funding is earmarked for agriculture, Agri Environment, Fisheries and Rural Development 2025 to 26 in future years, and the Minister requires as much flexibility as possible. Members, I refer you page 213 of the papers for a reply from Board BIA, dated the 7th of March. They are on our agreed list of stakeholders, and Board BIA apologise for the late reply but states that the bill relates to the CMO regulation, which does not fall within its own remit. Members, thank you for your patience. Are we now in agreement to proceed to deliberations and the responses I have just highlighted, which will, I am sure, form part of our discussions? And if members are content, then we will make a start. And I welcome to the meeting the officials, John Terrington and Elaine McCrory. John and Elaine, I'm just going to ask you to give a very brief, if you can, I know we've had you here a couple of times, overview of each clause. And then I will quickly highlight any specific issues that have come up so far in our evidence sessions on that clause before I ask members if they have any queries or comments on that clause for the department. So I'm just going to ask you to now start this. Sorry. We're going to go to clause 1, which is the aid in fruit and vegetable sector amendment of the CMO regulations. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you, Chair, thank you members. As you were, John Terrington, I head up the Agri-Food Legislation branch, and again joined by Elaine McCrory, the head of the Supply Chain Transition branch. I had a couple of paragraphs to explain how we got this far, but you've been much more eloquent than I would have been, so I'll not take any more time. I will start with clause 1, if I may. Bill has 6 clauses. Clause 1 makes support under the Legacy Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme discretionary. That is, it removes an obligation to automatically fund all eligible claims, and in doing so, as the Chair has noted, brings in line with other agriculture support. Technically, it makes this change by amending Article 32 of the Assimilated CMO Regulation 1308 of 2013 and enables the Department to continue the scheme on a discretionary basis here in Northern Ireland. A new Article 1A is inserted into Article 32 of CMO by this clause, and it is simply a clarification as to who is eligible for the support, a PO or association of POs, but otherwise maintains the status quo in this regard. Finally, in clause 1, it contains some transitional provisions relating to existing fruit and veg aid scheme programmes. This is a belt and braces provision to ensure that nothing in the bill impacts existing agreed operational programmes, which would be due to end in December 2025.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just do this clause by clause, guys. So if you want to indicate if you want to input on that, I'd appreciate that. Just to revise with members in terms of some of the respondents, they had come back. They were not in favour of the clause, and obviously this is central to the bill. This is the main thrust, I imagine, in the discretionary aspect of it. Some of the comments that came back to us were that the removal of the requirement for all eligible claims to be funded leaves growers no future certainty. They said that the shift to discretionary funding raises the risk that decisions could be influenced by changing political agendas rather than based on clear, transparent criteria. Request to remove this term discretionary as future funding for horticulture will not be ring-fenced, and the bill should not be progressed due to the absence of a replacement scheme. And members, we know that these comments were written before the Minister's letter confirming he would not be closing the scheme, to be fair. However, I'm not sure that that changes fundamentally any response that they would have made, because obviously it gives that certainty for an extended period of time, but not beyond that. So there really are 3 parts to that clause that we might want to address in this discussion. And certainly from my perspective, I certainly can understand the Minister's desire to protect the ring fencing of the wider agri budget, but also look for the discretion in here. Certainly in dealing with you guys from the department and speaking to the Minister, he certainly was, his words were good in terms of trying to offer some kind of ministerial assurance that the funding, the ambition would be for the funding to still exist and so on. The challenge for me is to try and balance the fact that it has been centred around the mushroom industry in particular and hasn't been it's not that there's been any blockage, but there's been no uptick by other organisations, and I'm keen to tease out where in each of these clauses, and we're only in clause 1 and it might have no effect on this, has there been any assessment done of particularly the element of discretionary or not to other industries taking up the opportunity to become
If I start on
this
clause, and Elaine talk wider on the wider sectors and where this clause or other clauses may impact. I mean, the Minister, I think, has sought to give reassurance all along, and his move to say that he won't be closing it and allowing for a 3-year programme to be pulled together just lifts that, and hopefully, as seems to be with NIMGA, certainly provided that little bit of extra reassurance that was needed, and very much brings a line, as most of the stakeholders have asked for, the position in Scotland, where the schemes won't close to the end of the year, some time to develop something new. The Minister has said in that the letter, you'll notice, within the horticultural scheme, so it's looking at the horticultural sector, and not just the mushroom sector, because as it stands, this scheme is available to other sectors, and there's Scotland, England is widely used by other sectors, and one of the things certainly that has been looked at as part of the review is why that uptake hadn't been greater within, certainly under the European funding or our match funding since then.
Yeah, if you would like to talk about some of the other sectors we've spoken to, so we have spoken to the strawberry sector before, because they used to be involved in the Northern Ireland PO, the PO with the Northern Ireland head office, and in the end most of them left and didn't want to stay in the PO structure, and that's because they felt the PO structure didn't suit them. They didn't want to be constrained by it. All their produce has to be marketed through the PO, and they didn't like that because they had their own customer outlets, the trusted relationships with customers, and they didn't want to be constrained in that way. So that was one of the reasons why people didn't want to be involved. We also spoke to the UFU, to their fruit and veg committees, and I think you've actually received a statement from the UFU on the scheme where they feel it doesn't suit their structures at the moment, but they'd be happy to work with us again to see if the scheme could be amended in some way that it might better suit a wider range of sectors. And I suppose the other people we spoke to in terms of other sectors was the POs themselves did facilitate a meeting with some of the English POs, and as John said, you know, they are operating in herbs and salad vegetables and peas and all sorts of different sectors, and they talked about their experience and why they were attracted. And some of them had started out in the first instance as cooperatives, so they were already familiar with that process of working together. So it was a natural progression for them to then move to become a PO. And we don't have that same, I don't know what the appropriate word is, appetite maybe for working together in that way, which we need to build.
We don't mind if members do bounce in just on this, rather, because there's quite a bit to get through. But in this, and what I'm trying to tease out, and I'm not clear, and I maybe didn't ask the question clear enough, but by making this discretionary, does it affect the flexibility to the scheme at all, or is the decision to make it discretionary purely based on year-on-year financial liabilities for the department?
I don't think it'll be based on year, because the programmes are normally 3 year. So it's about, you know, the forecasting, the spending review period, looking at what's available. So obviously budget would be part of it, but it may also be around particular priorities. So you know, you may want to target particular areas. So that's where the discretion comes in as well, I would say.
Yeah.
Or particular sectors.
Okay, thank you so much. Declan?
Thank you for the presentation. I note that the sector welcomes the fact the Minister isn't planning to close this at the end of the year, and certainly is something that we as a committee had requested as well, so it's very welcome. Is there any assessment of when it will continue to?
I think, as Elaine said, legally, as the legislation stands now, unamended, it's a 3-year programme, and I would assume that the sector will rightly plan for 3 years. What the Minister's letter also says is to co-design something that would replace it. I think that it's a tide of whenever something comes in to replace it, then you could look at the FES. It may be incremental changes between now and then. It may be a new scheme under new powers. But I think that the position taken by the Minister that he won't close it until there was something better, which is what he's kind of said all along, is reflected in the statement to not close it, because there isn't anything there at the moment. But let's see how the co-design, which again, when we met stakeholders this week, was welcome to have them being involved in that, over, you know, and that you know how long it's taken to get new schemes to the committee over the last couple of years. So, you know, I think you're safely saying that's not going to happen before the end of this year. It's not going to happen quickly. But you know, I know it'd be lovely to say at a time, but it's that where the two things are moving in tandem. And if something it can be created that industry, the sector sees as being advantageous to it, well then you don't need the FES anymore. Vice versa, if there isn't anything there, they will continue to make the case for the scheme.
Yeah, so just to be clear then, thank you, Chair, so the co-design process for the new scheme will continue in parallel to the running of the FES, because certainly we know from the correspondence evidence that we received that as regards the mushroom sector, this is the only funding stream that they have, and for them to be able to plan ahead, I think that certainty is important. So the two will run parallel until such time as our replacement scheme is.
I would seem like the likely direction of travel.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Michelle?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your comments so far. I suppose I am a little bit concerned that although we have got some reassurance from the Minister, really that doesn't mean anything unless we see it on the face of a bill. And I am a little concerned in relation to the discussion around co-design. And we've heard from other sectors what that may or may not look like and the reservations that they have. And also the fact that we now have a bill that wasn't properly discussed with the sector, that was directly affected. And I'm saying that given the hostility that we've heard towards the bill, and that worries me, that essentially what we could be doing is agreeing to something but not knowing what it's really going to look like at the end. So I'm not assured by the comments from the Minister.
And maybe start off with, and then if you want to come in the technicalities. So I don't think we would necessarily agree that we didn't engage with the sector directly affected on the bill, because we do engage with them very regularly on this and have done from the outset. We've spoken to them a lot about the bill in tandem with the review and what they would like to see, what's good about the scheme and what they would like to see changed. So we have spoken to them all along about this. I think maybe where some of the additional anxiety is coming from is that we only have one PO with a head office here at the moment. The other two POs actually have their head office in England, and so most of the bulk of their turnover is generated in England, and they've also been very anxious about what was going to happen in England, and would like, I think they've said to yourselves that they would like DERA to step in if DEFRA is no longer going to fund them. They've just had confirmation yesterday that is the case, that DEFRA is closing the scheme at the end of 2025. This is something that we have been asking DEFRA to clarify for quite a while, and they have now clarified that they will no longer, English POs will no longer be able to avail of funding under this scheme. So I think that uncertainty about what was happening in England, being an English PO, has ramped up their anxiety. Having spoken to them earlier this week, yes, they're assured a bit. Well, I think they are reassured quite a lot about the fact the scheme is continuing, and that they have that additional confirmation that it can continue. But they have issues that they will need to look at themselves in terms of their own structures. And that's probably, I think you said, Chair, they referred to some of the operational difficulties, and some of the timescales are problematic for them. And that's because they will need to think about how they're structured going forward, and they would normally have to submit an operational programme by the 15th of September. So they're probably quite anxious that that's not a lot of time to do that. But it isn't purely because of the bill, it's because of all these other factors coming together that is creating additional uncertainties for them. So and perhaps there is scope within the legislation to be a bit more flexible on the timelines.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you've said. I suppose the concern that I have is the fact that there was, I suppose, an assurance given around the fact that there were 3 schemes which may have been helpful to the sector. And I suppose in some ways, when we're making our deliberations around this, I suppose we're considering, well, look, these are the alternatives that you can look at, and it's quite clear now that those 3 schemes don't work, and it worries me that we were presented with those schemes as an alternative to work alongside the bill, and now basically that's been scrapped, and we're now looking at potentially a couple of months on a review of FEAS, and we don't know what the scheme is going to look like, which will go alongside this bill.
Okay, I will start first with the CAFRE schemes. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts at the minute, and as John was talking about earlier, you know, the Sustainable Agriculture Programme, it's been a process, you know, it's a lengthy process to develop these new schemes and to follow on from what was available under CAP. So, as those schemes have developed, we've been monitoring what's happening, and okay, it's clear now that that's not what's going to suit the mushroom sector. Though to be fair to CAFRE, they are developing for the whole of the horticulture sector, so they're trying to target specific needs within the overall horticulture sector. It's just they're not particularly suitable for the mushroom sector. I think moving forward, you know, we've heard very clearly that the mushroom sector didn't feel that they were involved in the development of those CAFRE schemes, and there might be all sorts of reasons for that, which I can't speculate on because I'm not responsible for them. But, you know, we have heard that they do want to be closely involved. They have been closely involved in their review, which will obviously inform the development of suitable alternative schemes, and we will continue to talk to them as well. And we need to get some kind of formal mechanism in place to do that, so there's this regular engagement as we co-design the replacement.
Thank you.
I think, sorry if I might say, it's the very point you're making that has made the Minister look again and say, right, I've always given the reassurance that I won't pull the rug, those words many times now, and on reflection, on seeing and hearing that those schemes don't replace by any means, nor do any of the other schemes available. They said, well, okay, well, if there isn't anything, I won't have this cliff edge, and I'll let the programmes run for the time being. So it's a recognition on the very thing that the point you're making that has led to him to try and up that reassurance. And it does mean that regardless of the outcome of any review, that without any changes, it would be the scheme that is there now. The potential for schemes, which we'll talk about at clause changes, talk about clause 2, might refine it, might make it better yet, either in the meantime or as part of the outcome of some parts of the co-design.
I just feel at this point that it's nearly like we're putting the cart before the horse.
I think as officials we take a different view in the sense that, and particularly when the scheme is now going to run after the end of this year anyway, regardless of what happens by way of the review. We would say that if a review took another 2 months and the Minister said, right, I like that, but I want a co-design, I want to look, it's a legacy scheme, and it takes longer to bring that through, and you have no powers in the meantime to do anything with this scheme, well then it's falling short of what others, again, we're moving into clause 2 to some extent, the powers that are there, but that the bill provides for amendments to that, and in that sense that having the powers to be able to change it. The same way as in 2020, some powers were given to change some of the CAP schemes. to keep them alive and make them safe. But those powers have been used after that as policy has developed. You know, you're using the powers developed to demand what's already there in terms of the fruit and veg aid scheme. So I say the cart above the horse, in front of the horse. I think it's they're enabling powers to allow changes. Any concern that that review might end up to closure, and then it's cart before the horse because you've taken the discretionary power, I think is offset by the fact that it will not close, and therefore the review can then, as it said, help inform the future any future replacement or improvement.
I suppose the concern I have is that we're maybe giving a blank cheque at this point without actually seeing the detail of what will come next.
But any changes we make, sorry, I'm getting into your territory here. Any changes we make would be, would require regulation, which would be subject to affirmative resolution. So there's, as we develop the policy, then we come back and we say, right, this is what we've talked to the sector, this is what we think is the way forward, and here's the changes we think we need to make in order to do that, and then the committee has the scrutiny of those proposed changes.
And I suppose that maybe takes me on to a different point here, and I really apologise for this, the fact that we've been through this process with regulations. The most important part of all of this will be is primary legislation, where the committee does have a certain amount of control with regards to scrutiny and potential amendment. When it comes to secondary legislation, we don't have that. So that has been a problem for us, and it's a problem and certainly a concern that I do have.
One observation is the powers that are taken. Apologies, we're again getting into clause 2 here. As yet unexplained, the powers that are taken are actually quite narrow, in the sense that they can only change the legislation that's already there. And the RAISE report set out some of the things that could be changed. Some of those things could be changed, and they are the things that a number of the things that the stakeholders have raised in terms of length of programmes, level of support for environment, various things. I don't disagree with the experience you've had recently in terms of, but part of that consultation period and making of that would be consultation with stakeholders and draft affirmative legislation in order to bring any of those changes forward. I've certainly sat here and the committee's not like something that'll be supporting the legislation that we've went back and reviewed and tried to find a way forward. So.
At some point about maybe I'm being a little devil's advocate, but I suppose we do have to be concerned whenever there's never going to be wholesome support for every piece of legislation that comes through, and I appreciate that, but I suppose we still have to ask the questions. Thank you.
Michelle. I've just got one last question on this clause, and then I think if there's nobody else is indicated, did you indicate to me? Well, just if you let me do this one and then bring you in, and then we'll move on to clause 2 if nobody else is indicating. So this is probably the most difficult deliberation of the whole bill, I would imagine, clause 1, because it underpins the ambition of the minister and department in this regard. But in terms of the definition of discretionary in this clause, is there any confidence in there that discretionary could be underpinned by something which is mandatory, which is that something can be designed to inform what discretionary means, so the promise is from the minister at the moment that, all being well, money will always be available, based on the fact that this was launched before the minister was able to achieve ring fencing of the agri budget. So this is in a different phase of the pressures, I suspect. But if discretionary, not because Michelle's points really rang something with me which might be helpful. If discretionary was underpinned by something which was quite robust, that in this circumstance, because this is moving from something that was ring fenced and sort of concrete for these guys, that if these articles are hit, then it's still available and still kind of can be ring fenced. But the discretionary piece obviously is if you step outside of the parameters. Because I can't find anywhere in this.
You've punched me in the nose that I don't know the answer to that. I'm not too sure how you would get over it. Discretionary means discretion: who to pay, what to pay, how much to pay, when to pay. It covers an awful lot of bases. Jerry yourself has mentioned other sectors, and there is a genuine interest in the review as to why other sectors didn't do it. Particularly, if this had been a EU scheme and we were out pushing it, somebody else was paying for it. As is happening in South of Ireland. I think the fear is if you start playing around with that, you're possibly restricting. If you're talking about the mushroom sector, for example, you're very pointed about whether is there potential. So one of the potentials in this is that the scheme is looked at and is decided that it's worthy in some amended, updated, improved form to go forward, and that scope is there for other sectors. On FUDA, for example, one of the CAFRE schemes, getting people together, and they didn't like this idea of
Collaboration.
Thank you, collaboration, because they were already collaborating, was their argument. But you could see that another sector might use the collaboration opportunities to get to where they got to in England and Scotland, and they're better. Well, how can we take this to another level? Why don't we form a PO and get it to raise the money? So, without quite understanding your point, if you're trying to narrow it to protect that sector, you may have an unintended consequence on limiting it to other sectors. Which is, for your very first question, does discretionary limit? No, it doesn't. The rolls forward under the same rules as it would.
Which goes back to my first question, which is doesn't actually introduce a whole lot more flexibility either under that clause. Now it may do in terms of the regulation, which as you said is by affirmative resolution. I get that, but if it, as Michelle's point is quite right too, that if it doesn't say it on the front face of the bill and set out the intention, then the strategy and the regulation is does nothing, but it's fine. I'm trying to wrestle this in my head. Similarly, still, it's.
No, I mean, I said I can't think of a parallel. Yeah. I've done some primary legislation. There's people in the room who've done more than me, but I can't see how you would get to that point by asking OLC to draft that. But you know where we live. But I mean, the discretionary doesn't impact on anything about the flexibility whatsoever. I mean, I guess one thing that it does do, and we'll go back to this issue, and Elaine making the point that the producer organisation is currently based in England, headquartered in England. They, without this, the risk is they bring with them, in some way, it's not a direct swap, and there are things that they would have to do, and there's things that we would have to do. But you end up bringing English members and having to pay those, and that the discretion for the minister to say no, I'm not doing that, which effectively what the English legislation said before it said we're closing it completely. So you're limiting even further the discretion to widen it to other sectors, because that is that's an open checkbook at that point.
Yeah, it's fixed up. Thank you very much, Patsy.
Yeah. And then it's back to this question, because this is now. Can I just read you out what's in the departmental letter here, and can I just for a minute ask you to be devil's advocate and put yourself in the place of the manager of a firm, or the accountant for the firm, or the bank manager to whom that firm is going to seek support. The bill simply brings the FVAS in line with other grant aid, which is also discretionary, with policy priorities at any given time driving who or what can or cannot be funded, as well as the level of funding. Now, present that to a bank manager. They'll get the heebie-jeebies. They'll say, what? You expect me to give you 20, 30, 40,000 of a loan per annum for the next 5 years based on that? Honestly, that's not good. I think what you have to do at that point is, it's how or in what way you commit, or the department commits, to a level of undertaking whenever any letters of offer go out, because that as it stands there for me is saying you might or might not get any, even if we decide that you're an eligible scheme, you just mightn't be there. And that if you're looking at this from the business point of view, what you need is certainty. You need at least certainty of income. You need certainty of support. You need certainty of sustainability to protect the business. basically. And if a key element of that is that certainty which should be coming from the department is absent either in part or in whole, that creates a whole, and I can understand why people, you've said, people aren't exactly jumping up and down about the scheme. You know, if I were in business, I'd be saying, what?
Yeah, and Patsy, I totally get that. I totally get that the uncertainty is very, very difficult for these folk, particularly, as I said, for the two with their headquarters in England, who must be so anxious about what's going to happen. However, on the other hand, the way this would work is the Minister has said, I'm not closing this scheme. In practicality, what that means is that those organisations who are eligible for funding here would draw up an operational programme. The legislation says it's a 3-year operational programme. That programme comes to DARA for approval. DARA then writes out to them and says, here's your maximum funding over the next 3 years. So that, to me, is a bit of certainty, at least to know over the next 3 years, this is what it is.
You'd also say that the approvals are based on meeting the requirements of the legislation, which in effect would be exactly the same as they've been meeting up to now.
So,
see if unless we change something, which would have to go through, but that...
But this element of discretion in the legislation and what you've said there, the department has said, the policy priorities at any given time, even who can or cannot be funded, as well as the level of funding.
and this is an enabling bill. So at this point in time, that purely enables the department to do it. And the Minister in tandem with that has given a commitment that they can submit another operational
And
programme.
can I say that that letter, that line is reflecting on discretionary funding per se. It is saying that discretion is the Minister at any one time to decide how he uses his budget. Is not any reflection on any intention or any aim of the scheme. That is what, in terms of whether the Minister wants to fund young farmers, whether that is the discretion at the time, or really wants to do more for the environment or whatever it is, which has to go through a process of agreement.
I get that, and we're not even going to the point of, do you have budgets for this yet, because you said this is enabling legislation. But do you get the point that I'm making? For a business perspective, be that with the accountant, be that with the bank manager, that longer term projection, this interpretation and so many injections of uncertainty in those couple of lines there, it's heavily equivocated.
Apologies.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, a 3-year programme gives the mushroom sector an awful lot more certainty than any other sector who's relying on the transition payments or relying on applying to schemes, competitive schemes. Otherwise, there's a 3-year programme is pretty good, and that's what I mean. The industry have asked for, the same as what Scotland have, which is 3 years and a chance to review this, and that's what's built into it.
And just for the record, the feedback that you've had, Chair, with your forbearance, the feedback that you've had from the sector around that level of commitment for a 3-year programme and the effectiveness of the programme which is being proposed. In your...
Do we feel...
What feedback have they been giving you about that?
Feedback that we had earlier this week on the Minister's assurance.
Yes.
I think that they were pleased, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but they were pleased to have this reassurance. They were pleased that they would be able to submit a programme. There are things that they have to work through, and we touched on those earlier.
Right, okay.
They will have to work these through, and we can't do that for them.
No, I get that.
Because it's about what they want to do and the business decisions they want to make.
Okay.
All we can say is, look, this is what is here. Now you need to work through some issues. We can point you to the relevant bits of the legislation, but you've got to work through these things yourselves.
Okay.
And then in tandem with that, we will be working with them to try and design something that they feel is suitable alternative support. I would say one other thing I would say is they did say that they appreciated the fact that we do talk to them. And that they all said that they were pleased that we talked to them and that we continued to talk to them.
So forgive a stupid question, but why wouldn't you?
Well, exactly, you know, but and that's without wanting to blow my own trumpet. That's how I would do things. I would talk to people about it.
Part of making that point, Patsy, is that when they were here, they talked about being assured of things that never happened, and we think that they were reflecting on conversations with DEFRA, because two of them are headquartered there. Right. And we think there was, you know, that I again don't want to undermine their evidence of presentation, but you know, but sometimes it is difficult. They're seeing where the money's coming from. They're seeing what you know where and I, you know, you would you might think that DEFRA should be speaking to them too, whether they are or whether they aren't. I think sometimes they're reflecting on that they have more access to us than they might to DEFRA, for want of a better way of putting it.
Right, thanks. I'm sure we'll hear from the mushroom people at some stage anyway as to what their views are. Thank you.
I think right. John?
I'm not being deliberately brutal on this, and I'm not seeking to correct any previous speakers, but I think, you know, where there's a different of emphasis or a different level of consideration, it's best to express that so others can consider everyone's point of view. But I think I have to say that, you know, as guardians of public interest and guardians of public expenditure, there's a duty to look at taxpayers' money and how it's most effectively being spent. And I'm going to go out to outline some of my concerns based on what I've heard so far. First of all, I would be very concerned about any comparisons being made with bank loans or private sector business. This is public sector action with public taxpayers' money. And it's a very different situation. A bank loan, I think almost without exception, is paid back with interest. This is taxpayers' grant funding. It's a very different scenario. And therefore, it does not seem unreasonable at all to me. I'm trying to apply this fairly across every section of the overall sector, that flexibility should be in place, that where one group's need is greater than the other, and where there might be arising and emerging issues or changing demand, whether that's seasonal, weather-based, market-based, or anything else, that it might be therefore best to have in there some, whether we call them flexibilities or discretion. It's probably not important. And I don't want to put officials on the spot, but I'm asking, is that some of the thinking behind the intent of the bill? And is there some credibility then in my rationale, which would be, there were examples during COVID where sectors who came to this committee in the previous mandate felt that they were being left out because there wasn't discretion in some of the funding packages that had been set up, and the minister at that stage had to go and look for other funding streams and managed, in fairness to him, to do so. But I can remember us being under considerable pressure in those circumstances, and therefore I'm contending that in a situation where there was a market change or a weather change or any seasonal influence or political, worldwide political and global issues like we're seeing mentioned in some places currently, that we might want to keep some flexibilities in mind, because that is the fair and right thing to do. Is that a reasonable analysis?
Well, without drawing any of the parallels that you have drawn, I mean, certainly the idea of the discretion is to protect the public purse and have a say how best it is used for the policy at the time, the position at the time. So I think that's a well-made point.
I'm chair in particular drawing the comparison with the COVID time, when there were people who had to come in quite a frantic situation because there wasn't something in place for them at that time, and something that none of us saw coming. And I would like some safeguards there, not just on this, but in general, to keep options open where change in need arises.
Just to flesh out John's point a little bit further, just for clarity, the mushroom producer organisations, two based in England at the moment, one based here. The scheme at the moment would enable the payments to be made to all three, but this discretionary, this change would mean that you have to be headquartered here, possibly? Is that part of the...
Under the legislation as it currently stands, you always had to be headquartered here. Well, the legislation was taken from the EU legislation, amended slightly, and it has always said since exit that DERA is responsible for paying those who have a head office in Northern Ireland, and a head office in Northern Ireland is determined by an article in the legislation which says it must be determined by where they achieve the majority of their value of marketed production, but by agreement it can be where they have the majority of members. So we're bound anyway to only pay people who have a head office here. The problem is the membership of the organisation won't necessarily just be Northern Ireland growers. It'll be English. There's one Scottish grower, I think, as well, in one of the organisations. So you can have a group of members from different locations, but the head office must be in a specific place.
That sits outside of the remit of this, so it'll still be the definition will still be applied within this.
That definition will still apply,
and that's something that you just need to be aware
and
of.
that is to do with the recognition of producer organisations as well, which is determined by DEFRA.
I think the point here is that, and the uncertainty that was expressed, in part, there was uncertainty clearly in what we were doing, but uncertainty what was happening in England is those POs whose offices are here and have some members here, but whose official head office under that legislation definition are in England and include English members. And until clarification yesterday, or confirmation yesterday, that the scheme will close in England. So they'll be getting nothing, or at least until they come up with something new and develop something, and that's part of an ongoing process in England too, and DEFRA too. The problem is that, well, okay, fine, this no longer exists in England, but if we could be a member somehow and move our head office to Northern Ireland, then we would be liable to pick up. And that's not straightforward. All of those operational things you referred to at the very start are all wrapped in that, where your head office is and how you would change that and what that process is. And the voting members will still be voting members whilst they're a PO in England, so they'll have a say in that. You can see the complications that they have in front of them. But that's a consequence of closure in England more than it is anything that we have in front of you today.
Thank you. We're nearly. Listen, I'm sure we'll come back to this as a committee anyway, and just remind members, like, this is a piece in work that will work over a period of weeks. So we're not closing out any of the clauses today. This is to tease out as much information as possible. I've got a working paper that I'll be using and going off, guys. So I'm going to bring William in, and if that's the case, if we're content that we'll move on to clause 2, and we may not get through all 6 clauses today, guys. But I don't intend that this committee today is going to exhaust you guys, because we'd like to invite you back for the next session as well.
Okay.
William?
Well, it has been accepted that in Northern Ireland there's potential to grow the horticultural sector, probably double the size. You did say about developing a new policy. My colleague talked about putting the cart before the horse. Should we not have developed a new policy before we go down this route?
In an ideal world, the things that were being designed would have dealt with, all sectors and provided opportunities for all sectors, and that's what the CAFRE schemes, that's what the capital schemes have been looking at. It has been recognised that this particular sector perhaps doesn't get everything out of those proposals, and that's why the Minister said, well, okay, we'll go back to the drawing board and see whether we can design something that will be of better use and continue that push towards doubling the horticultural sector. So yes, but it didn't.
You know where I'm going
so that's a recognition that there isn't anything to replace this yet. So we'll keep this going for all the good and bad and indifferent that it may have, and the review will point that out. But it will roll forward as is now with a 3-year programme.
It'll be interesting to see how that all develops. I would have some concerns. Okay.
Happy enough?
Yeah.
Thank you. Are members content at this stage that we've kind of teased out clause 1? What if we are? What I'm going to suggest is it's 11:45 to 12. Clause 2 may not take as long, but it might once we start into it, right? I'm going to suggest that we just clause 2 will do us today, if members are content, and we will come back and then take clause 3 and clause 4. And obviously, members have the right to come back to any of those points at any stage as information comes together. I'm just aware that some people might need to put out notice shortly.
Gone clause 1.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Clerk, for that. Is there anything, so that I don't have to do a big workshop with the officials from the department on terms of clause 1, specifically like that you would like to see brought back, so that we're not going through it in detail next week? Obviously, you'll be able to pick up some of the comments that were made anyway. You might want to address. I've just got one, if that's okay, and rather you don't have to answer it now. I was just thinking, is there any existing schemes that are absolutely discretionary, or there are any that were previously ring-fenced that were moved to discretionary in legislation that be used as an example? Indira.
We're not aware of any. I mean, this is the legacy of the EU, this being an EU scheme, where they were very clear, the broader shoulders than the ring-fence budget. They were very clear to say, and they were also pushing to develop the sector and whatever. But they said, well, as long as you can put forward, as long as a producer organisation can put forward a 3-year programme, 5-year programme, depending on what it was at the time, that met all the requirements, then that would be supported. That I can't see that being. I can't see us getting through the Department of Finance if we came with a new scheme to Northern Ireland Executive with that, if that makes sense to you. Whether that answers that somewhere in the distant past or in another legacy situation that exists, but I'm unaware of it. And I say that it's a to some extent it's a regularisation to what would have been a norm if this had been a Northern Ireland only scheme from square one. Where we'd put it to the committee as a potential scheme to this, and they'd have thought it was fantastic because it's given them 3 years or 5 years, whatever else. That doesn't take away from the nervousness they may have of changing something, but I'd be very surprised if there are something you could point a finger at.
Okay. Do you want to come in here, Declan, before we move on to
Very
closing?
brief closing comment, Chair. It's just on the issue of discretionary funding, and I've seen it in the past. Whenever there is, say in future years, if there is a budget cut or a reduced budget, it's the discretionary schemes that are the low-hanging fruit. So that would be the fear that I would have by making it discretionary, that it's the low-hanging fruit in future budget years.
If I may respond, all the funding the department gives out to the sector is discretionary. There may be other things that that's always the case. That will always be the case. That the reason for the line that Patsy referred to is about saying that the funding allocation is there. Priorities will change over time. If the minister wants to push horticulture, money might have to go that way. Those are grant aid is always low hanging. If that's the way it is, that will be the first thing to go after you've done your statutory requirements, after you've done the things that have to be done, after the baby's been fed. This is always, your words, low hanging fruit. This is always up to be. So this makes it no different from decisions that will be made sometime in the future about any of the other grant aids where the things cost more, so the grant aid effectively comes down or whatever else it is. More money has to be found. So grant aid is always discretionary. That's the point, and that's the alignment with what else is out there. Recognising your point, well made.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Just on that point, one wee thing. However, if the condition of the offer is a commitment by the department to fulfil its financial obligations to that scheme or to that project, could you just expand a wee bit more on that for clarity?
Do you mean if the department gives a letter of offer to someone?
Right, and the conditions
then normally
within...
that is a commitment.
Yes.
It's a contractual commitment. Once you
Yes.
give a letter of offer, if the person who's going to be in receipt of the grant aid delivers the things that they've signed up to do,
And you'd be open to challenge.
and you'd be open to challenge if you do not fulfil that commitment. So I
Ditto.
don't think that discretionary bit negates giving
Well, I
somebody
think
a letter
that-
of offer and saying, right, this is what you're getting for the next 3 years.
Why I'm
You
saying
do
that
XYZ.
is that issue of doubt, and from what I've read there today, that issue of doubt is maybe out there as well, right?
I don't think.
Be surprised.
I don't think so. I think there's a recognition that the legislation says a 3-year programme, or instead of 1-year programme, a 2-year, 3-year programme, whatever they signed up to. that once that's over, and that's what's on the table now, that the department, as it should, would
understand
honour
that, and I get that, but it's just to make sure that's clarified, and I'm glad
I
that you
think,
did.
to be fair, I think the POs are so used to this scheme, then, and I think they've talked before about that's what they'd like, is that certainty and that stability, where they know when they get their letter, that's their approved maximum level of funding. That's what they'll get if they do all the things they say they're going to do. That's what they'll get,
And that would
and then
also-
they match fund the other half of it.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm not even going to look at you anymore and ask you any more questions on one. I'm just not going to get eye contact with any of the members. Okay. We do have a tight schedule today, guys. Well, I am going to hazard to move into clause 2 if we can, but I'm going to literally put a cut-off time on it, guys, because we can return to it, okay? Because we have more work to do today after this. So I'm just going to ask John and Elaine to give us a brief overview of clause 2.
It will be very brief.
Yes.
Moving on to clause 2, this is where we find the powers of the department to make regulations to modify the listed the legislation that is mentioned in the face of the bill, assimilated direct fruit and veg aid legislation. That's its primary purpose, and I will say that's as important as the discretionary piece as far as the minister is concerned. Because if he decided, as he has, to continue it and not have any powers to make it a non-EU scheme, would seem so. There is a balance to be had in terms of which is the most important. It also includes an additional power to make more specific regulations regarding the review of decisions relating to support under the scheme. This is particularly important because when the sport's no longer mandatory, people might want to review or appeal decisions. The regulations under this power would provide for appeal of decisions and would be in line with rules already in place in other support, which is the reference to another piece of subordinate legislation you'll see in the clause.
Thank you for that overview. Members, I'm just going to read in some of the kind of responses, not the actual responses, but certainly the theme of those. The concerns were the potential to reduce the level of funding, causing more uncertainty to the sector. NI growers need a guarantee that the current level of funding will be ring-fenced. The power should not be given until the review is complete, and that there is a clear plan laid out by DAERA on the future of horticulture in Northern Ireland. I guess touching on Michelle's point. And then the risk to smaller farmers, including increased uncertainty in funding rules, risk of reduced or more selective funding, bureaucratic and administrative burden, potential for unequal treatment and limited transparency and accountability. And from my perspective, obviously, it's this now is into the flexibility space more than perhaps clause 1, which I'm interested in, is that flexibility, because obviously, as John had touched on, the geopolitics of the world, the competitive market space, the unintended events that are happening, but also trying to give certainty to producers here. And I don't have any specific questions on this clause other than to maybe make a few comments, guys. Has any members anything they want, any comments to make or any questions on this one with the officials here? And obviously we're not closing out any of these, we're just closing them out for the day, but we will be returning to them substantively. No?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you so much for your attendance then in regard
I think what might help you deliberate, if you don't mind, is the RAISE report raised a number of things that are in the fruit and veg aid scheme rules now. Attention paid to them will show you where the limits are on what the powers are. The draft would be very clear that this will be a whole new scheme. That might require new powers entirely. These are enabling powers to amend existing legislation. So if we were doing this from scratch, it would say to make regulations about the amount of funding, about and all of those things would be listed under, so you know what you'd be getting when it comes. And also to add that it is by draft deferment, so any changes that come would need approval of the Assembly.
I'm glad you mentioned the race paper, because the race paper is quite substantial, as you'll know. Having read through it, it's something that we will absolutely use as a bit of a guide for ourselves here on the committee too. But it's good to know that you're kind of looking at it, and as it kicks a bit my cup underneath. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you again very soon. Next week. Same place, same time.
In the diary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, members, are you content that that's us now started in terms of the deliberations of the bill? Anything else to add on that, guys, in terms of preparation for next week or anything? Are you happy to pick that up?
Yep.
Happy to pick up. Okay, members. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 7. SR 2025/40, the Farming for Sustainability Knowledge Transfer Payment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. Members, I refer you to pages 217 to 223 of the pack for the SR and the explanatory memorandum. It was laid on the 6th of March under negative resolution, and it is anticipated that will come into operation on the 1st of April 2025. We received an oral briefing on the SL1 at our meeting last week and heard that the Department intended to make this SR to introduce the Farming for Sustainability Knowledge Scheme, which will provide for payments to be made by the Department to eligible farm businesses in relation to hosting visits as part of the scheme. The committee raised a query around tax and agreed to write to the Department to seek confirmation if the payments were made under Regulations 3A and 3B and will be considered as taxable income to a farm business. And we're waiting a response. Members, last week we agreed that the Department proceeds to make the SR, and I will now put the question on the SR. That the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered SR 2025/40, the Farming for Sustainability Knowledge Transfer Payment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025, and has no objection to the rules, subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Members, are you agreed?
Right.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, SR 2025/41, the Suckler Cow Scheme Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. I refer you to pages 225 to 235 of the pack and explanatory memorandum. The SR will be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure and subject to executive approval. It is anticipated that it will come into operation on the 1st of April 2025. We received an oral policy briefing at our meeting on the 27th of February and a further oral briefing on the SL1 at our meeting last week. And we heard that the Department intended to make this SR to incentivise farm businesses to increase the percentage of eligible calving events within the Northern Ireland Suckler cow herd that achieve a reduced age at first calving and or calving intervals over a 4-year phased implementation period. The committee were pleased to note that the Department plans to review the scheme after 6 months and then at 2 years to address any unintended consequences of the scheme. Last week we agreed that the Department proceeds to make the SR, and I will now put the question on that SR. The Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered SR 25/41, the Suckler Cow Scheme Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are you agreed, members? Mm-hmm. Thank you, members.
Could I just ask for a wee bit of clarity on it as well? See, it was said to us at the committee meeting here that 50% of suckler cows calving events occurring during the first 3 months of the year, okay? And then it was said at the committee subsequently that 4% of suckler herds have calving events solely between January and March. I just want to get a wee bit of clarity around that there.
Yes, how the 4% corresponds to the 50%. I think you're right. And there's something rattling about my head that some of the farms are huge. But it's a good question because it doesn't necessarily tally easily. Sure, it doesn't. Yeah.
So basically, you know, I took a note of that from last week. You know, could we just clarify the difference between the percentage of calving events in January to March, which is 20%, and the percentage of herds of calving exclusively during that time, which is 4%. So it's just could this get clarified, please?
Yeah. No problem at all.
I should say, so 20% of calving percents, 20% of calving events between January to March, and then the second statement was that it was 4% of herds. So can we just get clarification on that there, please?
Yeah. I think Rosemary last week, I think you did ask her in terms of one aspect of that, and she gave some actual figures, yes, around 17,000, I think it was. But yeah, I think it's a good point, Declan, just make sure we're on the detail. Thank you. Content, members, thank you. Agenda item 9, departmental written briefing on the Blue Carbon Action Plan, publication of the synopsis report and final action plan. Yeah, this item was not received in time for the main pack, members. As we made it clear last week, the table papers were for urgent matters. This written briefing will now be taken next week. Any comments to make? Thank you, members. Agenda item 10 is correspondence. I refer you to a member from the Clerk to the Finance Committee dated the 6th of March, page 238 of the pack, regarding the budget sustainability plans. For information, as it meets on the 5th of March, the Committee for Finance considered a response from the Department of Finance providing clarification on the status of the budget sustainability plans. The Department has initiated the 5-year plans the departments have been asked to develop will include anticipated costs that the Department of Finance will produce a best estimate of block grant funding. This will not be an indicative budget, but it should aid understanding around any potential gaps between anticipated costs and estimated available funding. Members, have you any comments, or are you content to note? Thank you, members. No. I refer you to a member from the Clerk to the Finance Committee dated 6th of March, pages 239 of pack, regarding capital estimates. For information, at its meeting on the 5th of March, the Committee for Finance considered a response from the Department of Finance providing information on the capital easement highlighted in the spring supplementary estimates as a result of ongoing legal challenge. This is in relation to a procurement challenge to the award of a framework agreement. As the relevant framework cannot be used, delivery of such projects is being delayed across several departments. Have you any comments, or are you content to note? Content to note?
No.
Thank you, members. 10.3, referred to a member from the Clerk to the Finance Committee dated 6th of March, page 240 of the pack, regarding the NICS sick absence levels. Last week we agreed to write to the Department of Finance to ask, in addition to the health and wellbeing strategy, what other measures it is putting in place or considering to prevent sick absence. Have you any comments, or are you content to note? Thank you, members. 10.4, referred to the 34th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, page 253 to 261 of the pack. The report does not refer to any SR's relevance to the committee. Are you content to note? Okay, agenda item 11 is the forward work plan. A draft forward work programme can be found in table papers at pages 32 to 34. Do you agree that the forward work plan is published? Thank you. Just to remind you that once this meeting adjourns, we will hold an informal planning session and we will be staying in this room. Agenda item 12 is any other business. Okay. The date and time of the next meeting then will be Thursday, the 20th of March 2025 in Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. when we will have a briefing from the Minister. Thank you, members. This meeting is now adjourned.
Committee Room 21. Sound.